Good morning. It has been a good morning, now that I think about it. Thankfully, I remembered my glasses. I went to college for the first time at the age of 45. I was almost exactly 1 year free from addiction to mind-altering substances. I was this guy who never felt like he fit in or measured up. I thought college was a place for really smart people, and that I wasn't one of those. I was plagued by some thoughts. Who the hell do you think you are going to college? And I guess you're going to prove to yourself and the world that you really are a loser. And you know you can't do this, so why even try? There was good reason for these thoughts. I hadn't been in school for 27 years. My performance in high school was dismal. I had been using one or more drugs to get through the day for 30 years. I had minimal social skills and a complete lack of confidence. However, I hadn't been high in a year, and that had to count for something. I had learned to ask for help, which sometimes meant admitting that I didn't know how to do some of the things that most people either knew or could easily figure out, like enrolling in college. I was generally embarrassed by my situation, and fear of embarrassment was a constant resident in my consciousness. I felt like an idiot, and I was doing my best not to look like one as well. In one of the relapse prevention groups I attended, I mentioned to the group leader, after the group was over, of course, that I thought I might want to try college, maybe even become a substance abuse counselor. She said, "Why don't I take you out there and show you around and help you get started on the paperwork?" I immediately started to thank her and turn her down because how embarrassing to admit I hadn't a clue. She stopped me and said, "I offered because someone did that for me, and I don't think I would have made it out there if they hadn't." I accepted her offer and learned where the admin offices were and the academic counseling offices, and perhaps most importantly, to an impoverished, formerly addicted person, the financial aid office. She showed me the office where you sign up to take assessment tests. I didn't know about assessment tests. They do assessment tests so they can place you in English and math classes at the level you are at. What a concept. To say that I excelled at math would be to say it came easy to me. It did not. But by spending 2 to 4 hours a day, 7 days a week on it, I did get an A. In English, I learned that a lot is 2 words, not 1. And I was so relieved when the teacher said, "Relax, several of you didn't know that." I'm probably up here today because in that English class, I fell in love with writing. I went out there to study addiction from books. I already had an honorary doctorate in the experiential piece of that study. The addiction classes were full of people recovering from addiction, and in general, they were closer to my age, and like me, many were in college for the first time. Since addiction classes were related to my targeted vocation, you'd think they would have been my favorites, but they weren't. I love the sociology, psychology, philosophy, Eastern religion, and anthropology classes because each was offering clues about what it means to be human. Each was also contributing to the goal of being a writer and a spiritual teacher, although neither of those goals had surfaced in my consciousness yet. What I loved the most were classes relating to communicating, English, creative writing, public speaking, argumentation, and debate. After college, my love of writing stayed with me. I wrote an 800-page practice novel called The Long Way Home about a guy who dies and goes on a very spiritual journey. Then I wrote a 500-page novel called The Book of Roy that centered on a fundamentalist character having his lifelong belief system challenged and replaced. I wrote a book of short stories called Delicious Mischief. I wrote a book that is part autobiography and part my favorite sermons delivered here at Unity called Talking Out Loud. I haven't worked as hard as I should at finding an agent or publisher and don't really like that they basically want you to be famous already. Hell, I don't even want to be famous. Nonetheless, I keep writing because it's what I do. Writing is a process, but it's also a way of processing life. Writing clarifies my thinking, requires that I continue researching the topics that interest me, releases internalized emotions, and expands my perspectives. I'm currently working on a book called Approaching Spirituality, and that's really what I'm here to talk about. It started with a question. If I was a person who wanted to explore the spiritual side of myself and yet was not interested in religion, where would I begin and how would I proceed in a manner that was both spiritual and logical? In my argumentation and debate class, I learned that we begin by defining the terms. What is spirituality? For me, the answer is consciousness. Spirituality is consciousness, and consciousness is awareness. So what does it mean to approach spirituality? It means to systematically reduce and or eliminate the obstacles to awareness. There are other lofty ways of describing spirituality, but awareness leads to those lofty characteristics, like compassionate intentions and exceptional gratitude. These are the natural byproducts of increased awareness. What is my evidence that such obstacles to awareness exist? We live in the same world of tribal fears that our ancestors and possibly our previous incarnations lived in. We are currently more likely to be at war with each other than at peace. When we don't have an external enemy, we fight with each other. Think of the current state of politics within our country. We treat our planetary habitat like a disposable diaper. Our lust for technology has become little more than a perpetually programmed pathology where consciousness doesn't stroll, it scrolls, and personal entertainment reigns supreme. The essence of spirituality is connection. We may never have been so disconnected. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm just speaking generally about our obvious trends in history. My intention with this book is to share a process that near everyone can benefit from. It's based on the idea of starting where you are, not where you would like to be, where someone else thinks you should be, or where you think you should be. There are 3 statements at the end of the book's introduction that help a person decide if this book might be helpful. 1, what I believe is a product of every conclusion I have drawn from every experience. Every experience I've had, but my conclusions may not be accurate. 2, there may or may not be a supernatural being with a personality that answers my prayerful request, and yet acute observation tells me that reality is intuitively responsive. 3, hope may be a reflection of my desire for the future, but can as easily be my way of avoiding what a particular moment is trying to teach me. If you agree with or are intrigued by these statements, you're ready to explore the ideas herein. Perhaps the most challenging part of the organization of this book was deciding on the chapter topics and what order to put them in. Decisions were made and changed as the project developed. Chapter 1 includes the interwoven topics of addiction and habits, pleasure and pain, brain chemistry, balance and imbalance, hope and prayer. Understanding the connections between these topics is essential for approaching spirituality. This chapter helps us to bring our habits and/or addictions from functioning automatically in an unconscious or subconscious way to being fully exposed to our conscious mind. Chapter 2 looks at the various ways we self-identify and how those identities can sabotage our efforts at approaching spirituality. True spirituality is about being here and now, fully aware of what's happening around us, but more importantly, what's happening inside of us as a response or reaction. In losing our various identities, we can shift from judge to observer, becoming more like a sponge and less like a guardrail that defends our identity. Chapter 3 examines our two primary inner voices, the voice of ego and the voice of soul. It does not identify the ego as the bad guy, but rather a worldly self that cannot be eliminated, but can be tamed and used in conjunction with our soul. Without wisdom and practice, our ego can run our lives. This chapter is about learning to hand over the reins to our soul. Chapter 4 illuminates the process by which emotions can teach us which inner voice is speaking, giving us a new view of negative emotions. This chapter looks at how the ego creates a personalized and judgmental narrative around what is, creating negative emotions as it does. The main message of chapter 4 is that negative emotions are attempting to call us toward the voice of soul. Chapter 5 looks at how our past interferes with the goal of exceptional awareness in the present. This chapter includes a process for reinterpreting our past using spiritual wisdom. Chapter 6 gets back to some spiritual basics: forgiveness, non-judgment, self-honesty, surrender, and gratitude. It's one thing to deliver information, but quite another to teach a person how to apply it to their daily lives. My objective with this book and the talks and workshops that will come from it is to have a lasting and positive effect in the lives of people who experience this material. Information is delivered in a talk, practice exercises are introduced in workshops that follow the talks, and a weekly support group uses positive peer support and shared experience to check in on how the practice is going. Information, practice, and support. All three experiences integrate the information in a way that will not be forgotten. What I teach, or what I have learned from other teachers, from personal experience, and from receiving information from the cosmos. I have practiced what I teach and found it to be useful to me. Aside from a small materials fee for the workshops, the proceeds for the talks and donations from the workshops will go into the Unity coffers. Like I said, the information and practices have been useful to me, but what I need to know is how other people experience the material. I need feedback that can be used to fine-tune the material. That's my reward for the efforts involved. So the plan, if the board approves, and there is a willingness from a few of you to participate in the workshops and support groups, is to do one talk per month, followed by a workshop and a weekly support group. It's a huge commitment. The workshops are mainly to introduce the practice materials and discuss the implementation. Once each week, we'll meet to talk about your experience with the practice and how it is or isn't helping you. The idea is to encourage you to keep up the practice through positive peer support. Having a weekly check-in group will help keep the practice in the forefront of your consciousness. I will also make myself available for questions, emotional support, or counseling during the 6-month duration, and consider making the support group an ongoing group. I hear wonderful talks here, but they don't always sink in. I've created something that, like I said, has worked for me, and I want to share it. It's no minor commitment, but I believe the rewards will be equal to the effort. See me after the talk if you're willing to commit to a 6-month adventure in approaching spirituality. Namaste.